This is LS, and you're on Thorin's YouTube channel, so cut the Western shit.
Poaching, or tampering, as it is quite often also called, particularly it's a US sports term, is when a team or a player approaches a player from a different organization or even a coach who is under contract with that organization in one of the regions where this applies. In theory, it applies to all the regions now, the LCS, the LPL, LCK. And he begins to speak with that player about joining his team, about leaving the other team while he is still under contract. Because within the setup of the LCS and all these other leagues, the ruling is that if you want to approach said player or coach, you have to first approach his team to request permission to speak to that player since he is still under contract with that team. So you might have noticed this is a scenario which led to so many of these off-season tweets where players were saying, like, I've gotten permission, I'm allowed to speak to other teams, like, here's my email, contact me. Some of those weren't even literally just like trying to tell everyone in the world that they are available now. Some of it's just trying to communicate to a few certain people, like, hey, you can come forward and talk to me now, like, let's make a deal. Obviously, a very recent scenario in which it was alleged that poaching took place was Cap's bizarre and incredibly shocking but exciting decision to leave finalists of Worlds Fnatic and LCS champions and go over to rival team who long time ago were champions, G2, and become the starting mid laner there, with Perkz, their star mid laner in the team of G2, deciding to then become the AD carry. Now, the suggestion was that it was Perkz himself who sort of wooed Caps, who convinced him to join, who perhaps even told him, hey, come and join me, like, the two of us are amazing, let's play together, I'll be AD carry, you be mid lane. And this was all done, supposedly, before Caps' contract was up, in a scenario in which G2 should have approached Fnatic first and asked permission to go and talk to this particular player. So even though people will discuss in each case where poaching is alleged or indeed found to have happened and punished, like, oh, that specific incident of, oh, did he do it? Should he have done it? What do you think of this move? People don't tend to actually discuss the concept. And the reason why I find that so bizarre is because the way it's implemented at the moment is ridiculous. Like, not only can you not stop it, I mean, I know you can say technically in terms of literally, you can't stop a lot of crimes. Like, you know, it's very hard to prevent them. You can only really punish people afterwards and investigate afterwards. But I mean stop in terms of, like, make a deterrence to teams to make them want to not poach. Punish teams so that they are appropriately damaged, inhibited, limited as a result of trying to gain an advantage, trying to get something that they shouldn't have been allowed to in the current system, or breaking particular rules. It's basically impossible under the current setup of the rules, and has been the entire time this has been the case in League of Legends. Now, Riot, as far as I know, was the first in Western esports to introduce even the concept of this. In CSGO, even until up to fairly recently, like, there are no rules that say there's poaching. Sure, you could. There's the real world aspect. If you could go to court with someone and say, this person broke a contract with me, because that's going to take years, because it might cost a lot of money, a lot of people just don't do that, quite frankly. Now, it's true, there's not a lot of poaching in general, but I will also say one of the reasons why in a game like CSGO there's not a lot of poaching is because when someone just comes to his org and says, you know what, I want to go and join this other team, they've talked to me about it, actually the orgs tend to just say, we'll facilitate the move then. Now, to be fair, there's also the logic that because you can have your player taken like that, when someone takes your player, you can then go and get a different player, perhaps from a lesser team, perhaps someone where it'd be a big step up for them to join your team, perhaps even someone very good from one of your rivals. So everyone can kind of get away with it, so that kind of neutralizes the competitive advantage to some degree. Now, the reason why I say in Western esports, I think Riot was the first to institute it, is almost certainly something akin to this has existed in the contracts of players in Korean esports and Chinese esports for many years. In the case of China, I know more recently, in CSGO actually, the Chinese team Tai Lu had issues where some of their players wanted to leave and make a team called Flash Gaming. They were, basically getting fucked up by Ace, which is kind of like the Chinese equivalent of Kesper. It's like a Chinese esports organization that's an association or union, if you want to call it that, something along these lines. In Korea, obviously, since they have Kesper, again, Korean Brood War is a great example of where players simply couldn't just go from one team to another. Like, free agency was made very, very tricky. To be fair, the Asian mentality generally, if I'm going to be blunt, is they do treat their players a lot more as if they own the player, not just lease his time, and therefore, like, you shouldn't have, like, contacted my employee or whatever. Now, there have been many famous cases of poaching, so many that it shows that you just can't stop it, and that even punishing the people doesn't make people think twice, really, it seems, from doing it in the future. Like, go back really early in the LCS to end of Season 3, early Season 4. Bjergsen joins TSM, right? Massive move, obviously changed the whole course of the franchise's history and potential success. What a lot of people might forget now, or maybe don't know if they weren't around back then, is Bjergsen himself was actually fined for poaching NateDOhDoubleG and the Lemon Dogs players who had finished first in the regular split in the LCS, in European LCS for the summer in Season 3, so the previous split, because since he wanted to go to TSM, one of his managers at NiP told him something akin to, you have to get someone to replace you in our team, which is NIP, otherwise, why are we going to let you go? So Bjergsen went and got seemingly someone of a similar level who's available. Lemon Dogs was an org that had connections with NiP. They weren't a massive org anyway. And he was able to convince this person, the Lemon Dogs players, to go to NiP, and therefore it was actually Bjergsen that was fined for poaching to replace himself. Then you had the scenario where when CLG got Dignitas player Zion Spartan, now known as Darshan, to be their top laner, and also got Skara to be their coach. So we're talking about going into Season 5 here. Initially, it was CLG was fined for poaching Skara, and then Doublelift and CLG were fined for poaching Zion Spartan Darshan. Now, the reason why it is just, one of the reasons why it's impossible to stop poaching is it just happens anyway, and it happens a lot more than people even know. Like, think of some of the incidents we've heard of people alleging that there was poaching. So a great example would be Echo Fox. Remember this storyline back in Season 7 where the story was, these guys are being denied scrims by the other teams. The other teams are sort of boycotting them because they think that this team was trying to poach players, including Adrian from Phoenix 1. Now, funnily enough, that ties into a side story which included a lot of fuckery, which was at the time, remember this is before franchising, and this is when owners wanted franchising. There was a report that came out, I think it was the Esports Observer published it, that said that Riot had been pressuring the owners to sign the agreement for the 2017 Season 7 of LCS by actually threatening them with allowing poaching, basically just saying, we'll stop doing the contract database and enforcing it in that particular way, and everyone will be allowed to poach if you don't sign this contract. So that was in line, in theory, with the Echo Fox scenario, and people have implied that the Echo Fox one was actually one where that was Riot sort of like saying, yeah, go ahead, do that, contact this guy. Yeah, there's sort of a loophole we can get out of it, because I believe they said that like his contract hadn't been fully submitted yet and put into the database, and therefore you're allowed to approach him even though he's under contract with someone else. So funnily enough, similar scenario, if you remember, in the past where they sort of give the sly nod to people to allow them to use people who hadn't yet gotten green cards, hadn't gotten work visas, weren't actually technically allowed to work in the US for many seasons of the LCS, if you remember that scenario. In fact, I think I even have a video on that topic. Then, of course, you have the infamous one where Chris Badawi, then owner of Renegades, came under fire because other NALCS org owners, like I think Steve Arnett from Team Liquid, I know that Reginald from TSM said that he tried to poach different players. So it was claimed he tried to poach Bjergsen from TSM, and he tried to poach Keith and Quaz from Team Liquid. It might even have been Curse at the time. No, I think they were Team Liquid. There's obviously here's a funny one, is people don't know about this, but I've seen many, many cases. Personally, I've seen the evidence, and I've known people who told me this. And funnily enough, sometimes the people telling me it then later on appeared in a different story as the person is the perpetrator, where I've seen logs where NA owners have approached players to basically try to poach them, try to get them in a position to where they can sign them to their team when they're under contract. But some of them were so sneaky that what they would do, and obviously you'd have to have in mind that you know you're poaching to do this and be very sneaky about how you do it. In Skype, I don't know if this function still exists, but you can delete a message that you sent to someone. But at least in the past, you used to only have a certain time window in which to do that. I can't remember if it was hours or days or what it was. But basically, what these people would do, it's actually still a technique used actually sometimes when people leak things to journalists because they don't want the proof to become that they leaked it. So what they'll do is they send you the message, you read the message, you see that they want to poach you. When you then come back a day later, a month later, a week later, whatever, and you want to check the message again, or even worse, you want to go and tell Riot about it, that they're poaching you, you want to tell your org owner who said, was someone trying to poach you? Suddenly you find the messages are all deleted. They sent the comment to you, they got the message out there, and they deleted it all, so the evidence is gone. A very famous way of doing this, actually, was just because most players aren't smart enough to actually open up OBS or XSplit and record a conversation they have over Skype, what would happen was a lot of owners who want to do shady stuff would just do it over a Skype call or in a Venturos, I fucking dated myself there, TeamSpeak or whatever, some modern day voice app. No one's going to know what the fucking Ventulo is. It's like something from 10 or 15 years ago now. So it's been happening a lot more than it's ever been publicized or punished for that matter. I mean, another one that was alleged, if you remember, was part of the reason why famously Amazing, who was the jungler of Orion, was really upset with Venomithi and made those really vitriolic tweets implying they sort of betrayed him or lied or something, because when they went from OG over, who'd actually finished second, if you remember, in the spring split of Season 6, over to G2, where they then became obviously decorated 3-time champions with the team, etc. The implication was Perks, perhaps again, and G2 as a larger entity, because Perks represents them in that sense, had poached these players, and that's why they left suddenly without some of the OG players knowing, and in such a bizarre fashion. Obviously the cover story then being the whole, we sent our other players on vacation who we then cut and never played for us in the LCS again. Now, one of the big problems with trying to prevent this, quite frankly, one of the reasons why it will always happen is, first of all, players get to represent orgs here. Even though technically a player, plays for himself in his contract, and if he leaves the org at the end of the season, he was never someone who was like a staff member. Players can take part in this poaching, and quite frankly are the most likely suspects in it, because players already have a fraternity, they have a peer group, they have friends, people they played with in the past, people they want to play with in the future, people who are just friends of theirs, and they talk all the time on a daily basis to other players. So it's even, quite frankly, for orgs who don't want players to poach, hard to stop them doing so. Like, a lot of these players are doing so without permission. So the really weird thing about this is obviously players are going to go and say to another player, hey, you know what, like, my team's pretty good, your team's pretty good, but imagine if the two of us played together next year. Hey, things didn't go that great with our jungler this split. Like, wouldn't you like to play with us next split? Like, your team isn't that great at the moment. These sorts of conversations are going to happen anyway. By the way, not even if they get the go-ahead. Maybe the org just says, no, I don't want that player, I won't do the deal. But players are going to have these discussions, and it's going to be very, very tough to beat out of them the kind of concept where, in conversation, that's never going to come up. Not least because one of the things that's always tilted me, and the reason why I say it's impossible to stop poaching, is because even with the current setup, people don't even do it in a very efficient or intelligent manner, quite frankly. Like, one of the easiest ways you could do poaching and get away with it is have plausible deniability in whatever you say if a log is ever going to come out or some incident of you having a meeting is going to come up. So being able to say something like, what happened was, hey, Caps, I had a dream the other day that you were playing in G2 and I was the AD carry. Wouldn't that be crazy? Nothing like that could ever happen, right? It's going to be tough to take that evidence and say it's poaching, right? What, a player's not allowed to just talk about even dreams now? What about a player says, hey, you know what? One day in the future, 5 years from now, I'd love to play with you. And the other guy's going to figure out he means, I want to play with you now, but I haven't said anything that says you're going to join now or you should break your contract now or anything like that. Nah. See, there's so many ways you could do it. I mean, I will say, by the way, that you could basically make the case that if you look at how Riot dealt with Renegades, basically banning ownership from Monte Cristo of it, on the basis that they said that a deal that there was no evidence for, it was all hearsay, and in fact hadn't even been enacted, because as far as I know, it didn't ever exist. They said just on the suspicion that deal was going to take place, they were able to punish and ban them anyway. So, I guess you could make the case that it's Riot's IP, nobody wants to sue them, and in fact, I know from the Renegades case that supposedly there was a clause in the contract, at least the old LCS agreement for the teams, that said you could only sue them for something, I think it was like $25,000 damages. So it's not even worth suing them if they fuck up your whole org for this. Now, that may have changed with franchising, there may have been a new set of terms, I'm not entirely sure. The problem is that one of the reasons for orgs why there will always be poaching, just as for players, they want to play with other players, they're friends with other players. The reason why for orgs you'll always want to poach, or think about it, or will consider it at least is because you get a competitive advantage over the orgs that don't poach. They're sat there thinking, oh gosh, I hope we can get that player, but I can't talk to him now. Oh, I wonder when he's going to be available. I wonder if he even would join our team. And therefore, should I build the deck already and make a big sponsorship pitch to him? Like recruitment pitch to him. I don't even know if he would join our team. Is there only a 1% chance he'll join in, which case I should put all my effort into it? You get a mad advantage if you at least find out he's open to it. If you at least get the head start that he wants to play with one of your players. You don't have to wait until free agency then. Everyone else is sat around like a pleb waiting for that fucking clock to hit 12:01 so they can go and call someone, right? Then you got to consider you can get the player under contract without his org having any say, without them having to agree to it. Because what if it's an org that you know wouldn't agree to it, like their enemies are yours or it's a star player of theirs, like Caps from Fnatic? You imagine if you say to them, can I get your player, that they're going to say no, and then you're going to be in deep shit, right? You're going to be in a scenario where then if your player comes to you and says, hey, I'd like to go and join the other team, you're going to be like, wait a minute. You asked me, and now my player's asking to join your team. How does he know he can join your team? How does he know it's viable? You actually put yourself at more risk if you know the org's going to say no. By asking them, you put a trail there that makes the circumstantial evidence suggest you were poaching him. The long-term benefit, if you can get really good players, big talent, the ones that are worth risking poaching for, like a lot of the ones that I cited before as examples, is obviously going to be you could win LCS, you could parlay it into having way more fans and then more sponsorship as a result, become a bigger org and become a titan of the industry, or maybe even win massive prize money, just make so much revenue from their streaming, from sponsorship, from everything, at least in the future. This is as much the case in more recent times where teams are losing money, that it's worth whatever could happen. I mean, I actually would contrast this in this sense to insider trading. One of the reasons why so many people are willing to engage in insider trading of stocks, etc., is not just that they want to make money off that stock and someone gave them a tip, etc. It's that depending on who you are, how big you are, and how much plausible deniability you have, you might, even if you get caught, only get a slap on the wrist. So say you got a slap on the wrist of 1 million, but you made 50 million off the deal. Well, you'll take that all day long, right? As long as you're not somebody who believes that's immoral, so long as you're somebody who's willing to flaunt that aspect and just go, if it's not illegal, I'll do it. Now, one of the reasons I've always found it crazy as well, by the way, that people think you can enforce the poaching or tampering rules, and quite frankly, that so many people get caught from them, is the smart way to do poaching isn't even just the one I said of like implying things. It's to use abstraction. It's to make it so that you never actually did approach that player. What happens is you get a third party, you tell them, I want to get this player. He has no connection to you outside of the team externally. He has no connection on any paper trail. He then goes to the player and says, hey, would you ever consider playing in G2? You know, I think if you were to play in them, they'd even consider something like moving another player elsewhere. That's going to be so tough to show that they're with your org, right? Because if it was the case that you could just bust people for that, well then fuck it. Why doesn't someone who's really unscrupulous just lie and say that happened? A great way to ruin your enemies, right? Have someone come forward, say, oh, here's some evidence, fake doctored Skype log that says this third party who has no connection. If you're willing to punish people who have no connection, you can't prove a paper trail. Oh, look, he was helping with this poaching, right? Kind of ridiculous. I mean, you could even use someone like me. I mean, I personally wouldn't do it in terms of like moral aspects, although then again, is it immoral? I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to think that through. You could tell someone like me, and then I can go to a player and go, hey, have you ever considered playing with Team Liquid? I think they'd be a great fit for you, and you know what? I think they'd be interested. Again, there's so much plausible deniability there. I'm not even involved in Team Liquid. I've never been paid a red cent by Team Liquid. How could you prove that it was poaching, right? Sure, it looks bad circumstantially if the player then joins or asks to join, but you see what I mean? It's so tough, right? I'm surprised how few people are actually smart enough to do shit like that, quite frankly. It reminds me of in CSGO, where famously this team called iBuyPower had some of their players banned for match fixing, mainly because they just did it in too short a time span and didn't think through a very good plan. So at the end, they literally got sent a whole bunch of skins that had been bet on the match. Therefore, when Valve actually like tracked the transactions, they could see that these people literally had benefited from the game and bet on the game in some sense through a third party. Now, instead, if they'd have done it where they'd have gotten like paid real money in real life through a totally separate scenario to their dad, who then gives them the money in real life. You know, there's so many ways they could have gotten away with it. Likewise, poaching, there's so many ways to get away with it. But here's one of the key points of the whole video, which is even when you do catch people, even when you find out they did poach, I don't even blame Riot for this. It is so difficult to punish those people appropriately. Because on the one hand, you want to punish them in a way that's fair, and that would apply to the whole league, right? So for example, you don't want to punish TSM with a fine of $100,000 if fining the worst team in the LCS 2 years ago, say, would have near bankrupted them if you'd have fined $100,000. And maybe that'd even be unfair. But at the same time, if you make it $1,000 fine, so the bottom team's okay and can still manage, now TSM could poach all day long because $1,000 was fuck all to them back then. So part of the problem is small fines don't really do anything. Like I said before, I mean, it's worth it if you got the LCS talent, right? Likewise, you can make people sit out games, right? There's another one. So Skara had to sit out some games as a coach when he joined CLG because of the poaching that was alleged by Odie. Now, that also is worth it. Like, I would, if there are certain players out there, you would risk almost anything to get. They could turn your whole franchise and your whole organization around potentially. Imagine if Team Liquid hadn't gotten permission to get Jensen from Cloud9, and they hadn't even talked to Cloud9, but they got Jensen as a result of poaching him, and Riot then came forwards and said, right, we found evidence of poaching. You know what? Big time fine. We're going to fine you $50,000, and he has to sit out the first 5 games of the split. Now, in the modern world, you could just sign a pretty good academy mid laner, or even get a good player who's not playing for anyone right now, sign him to your team, have him play the first 5 games, take the 50k hit, and then just think, well, it's worth it, right? I could still win this split. I could still win the next split. I could still go to Worlds. I could win many splits from now on. I could get way bigger sponsorship due to having a big name player like this, a fan favourite like this. Actually, even 50k and missing 5 games, probably worth it in terms of the overall upside that someone like Jensen would bring to your team in that scenario. So as a result, why obey the rules? Why sit around and let someone else make a sick offer to Jensen and then say to him, I know this offer's amazing, I know you probably want to think about it, but I'm going to have to only give you a day for this, so you've got to do it now. And then say a Team Liquid doesn't get in there or through the door on the first day. They're busy approaching on it. See what I mean? There's so many scenarios in which the temptation to do this is going to be so seductive to a team, right? Now, it might indeed be the case that franchising helps in this particular sense. Maybe there are more strict rules in terms of franchising as a result of it. Maybe Riot can sell the actual franchises themselves on the concept, I mean, technically on the permanent partner program or whatever. Maybe they can sell the teams on the concept that they shouldn't be poaching. That's really important that there isn't, and therefore teams themselves will band together to stop poaching. They'll band together to maybe boycott a team or threaten to kick them out of the league who poaches. That would be a pretty good way, right? If you made big strikes against the organization. Problem there, and this is why it gets impossible and tricky again, is now what happens when players do it of their own accord and you never told them to? Would be a great way for a player to maliciously fuck with an org that benches him, or he plans on leaving, or that he's having massive problems with that he knows are going to kick him, right? This is a good way to get them in trouble. So even though as a big picture thing, like giving the org, say, 3 strikes before they get some massive thing against them or get kicked out the LCS, sounds good until you realise, again, it's such a vague grey area with such sort of flimsy evidence in many cases, a lot of it being hearsay and looking for circumstantial aspects, that there's too much room for abuse with that. There's too many loopholes open, right? And also, I will say, one of the reasons why it's going to be hard to get a lot of these teams to get together and do it is, as you heard by the list of teams I ran off there, just the ones that are official, there's a lot of them. Then you look at the ones behind the scenes, again, there's a lot that have never been officially caught for it. There's so many people doing this and who plan to do it in the future, it would also be hard to get them to agree to really harshly punish teams, because generally, it's actually in the interest of the bigger orgs, the ones who tend to have more influence and power, to allow poaching, bizarrely, because at the moment in esports, where none of these contracts get enforced in real life, in the court system, where you would get massively wrecked, but it'd take years, in that world, in this world rather, where that doesn't happen, and it's only Riot who can punish you, well, actually, if they take my player, who the fuck do I care? I'll go and get the best player from the 5th best team in a smaller org, and I'll get him, right? Maybe that's even better for me in the long run. Who knows? So this is one of the problems with the poaching aspect. It's one of the reasons why I've always, I can't blame Riot. There probably should be something akin to this. I'm not entirely sure whether it should be like this, or whether you should allow a free-for-all and then just say let the chips fall where they may, 'cause in a sense that's fairer. But the problem I have with it is it's so arbitrary as to whether you get caught. The punishments seem to be incredibly arbitrary as well. They're not particularly written down and calculated in any way that we know or can discern. Teams do it and get away with it. Some of the same teams that did it and got away with it later on accused other people of poaching and had that upheld, by the way. One of the hypocrisies that I've always fucking despised. So it's just one of the toughest scenarios to be in and just makes the whole situation ridiculous. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas, Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, James Harding, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my upcoming content? Perhaps you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Do you want to see some teasers? See who's going to be the next guest on one of my shows? Maybe you want to take part in an esports discussion with me. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.